Samuella adjusted her scarf against the cold breeze that swept through the quiet town she'd recently moved to. It was a world away from the bustling city she'd left behind, a place where her family and their strict religious beliefs had always dictated her life. Here, she could work as a software developer from the comfort of her home, finally free from the expectations that had once defined her. She yearned for more than the life they had planned for her, a life beyond their rigid rules. As she walked out of a local shop, her eye caught movement in the distance. A small, scruffy dog sat by a lamppost, looking lost and forlorn. She wasn't an animal person, and she rarely gave stray dogs a second glance, but something about this one made her stop. The dog wore a worn leather collar with a small metal tag bearing a phone number. Hesitantly, she decided to call the number. Dialing the number, she listened as the phone rang.
Hello.
A voice answered, deep and rich. It was the kind of voice that carried an unexpected warmth, the kind that could calm you in a storm. Samuella had a thing about voices. Most didn't register with her, but this one did.
Hi, I found your dog, I think.
There was a pause on the other end before the voice responded.
Really? Thank you. I've been looking for him everywhere. Where are you?
Near the old park on Robert Street.
Great. And not far from there. I'll be right over. Thank you so much.
When the man arrived, Samuella saw him before he saw her. He wasn't what she'd imagined. His voice had given her the impression of someone polished, but his appearance was anything but. His clothes were slightly rumpled, his hair a bit wild, and his features, not unattractive, but not exactly striking either, just different.
Thank you,
he said again, his voice still carrying that same warm quality. He crouched down to pet the dog.
I'm Michael, by the way. Sorry about the trouble.
Samuella,
she replied, still a little caught off guard by the mismatch between his voice and his appearance.
It's no problem. He seemed lost.
Michael smiled, scratching the dog's ears.
He's always wandering off. Must be his artist spirit. Restless, like his owner.
Artist?
Samuella asked, curiosity piqued.
Yeah, I have a showroom a few blocks from here. I work on sculptures mostly.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
She nodded, though she couldn't picture what kind of art he'd create based on his current appearance.
I should get going. Have a nice day.
You too.
Michael replied, though his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than expected. As she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that their paths would cross again. The following Sunday, Samuella found herself walking through the town again. As she passed by a massive church, she couldn't help but feel a pang of curiosity. It seemed too big for such a quiet community. She wondered how many people actually attended service here. Then, with a mental shrug, she muttered to herself,
"What's my business?"
Just as she was about to move on, a car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, and to her surprise, it was Michael, the man with the dog. He was dressed more neatly this time, in a shirt and slacks, looking like he was about to attend church.
Hey, Samuella. Fancy seeing you here.
He greeted with a friendly smile.
Michael.
She nodded, clearly recognizing him.
I was just heading to church. You around here often?
He paused, glancing up at the building.
Want to join me for the service?
Samuella's chest tightened. The last thing she wanted was to be back in a church, the very thing she had been running from. Her family had only known church, and the idea of getting sucked back into that life horrified her.
No, thanks,
she replied bluntly. She didn't even try to sugarcoat her rejection. Michael seemed a bit taken aback but quickly recovered.
All right, no problem,
he said casually, though there was a hint of disappointment in his voice.
We're having a little get-together at a friend's house after church, just a few houses away. You should drop by if you're free.
I'm good, but thanks,
Samuella said, even more firmly this time. With that, she turned and walked away, feeling a sense of relief and frustration all at once. The fact that Michael was a church boy only made him seem more like the people she had been trying to escape. Days later, As Samuella wandered the town, she passed by a modest building with wide glass windows. A striking sculpture inside drew her in, and, entranced, she pushed open the door. She was halfway through admiring the piece when she heard a familiar voice behind her.
Samuella, you found my place.
Startled, she turned to see Michael, his face lighting up with a delighted smile.
This is yours?
She asked, awed. The sculpture was abstract yet emotional, radiating a beauty that caught her off guard.
Yep, this one's called Restless Spirit. Seems fitting for us both, doesn't it?
Samuella laughed, feeling unexpectedly light-hearted. They spent hours talking, their laughter filling the quiet space. She teased him about his lack of tech knowledge, calling him stuck in his sculpture world. In turn, he shared stories about exploring life's big questions through art, and after a long day together, he walked her back home. Their connection grew deeper over the weeks. Samuella found herself opening up about her past, her family, and the strained relationship with her faith. She spoke of how growing up in her family felt like being under constant scrutiny. If she ever skipped church or didn't read her Bible, she was branded the black sheep. It was as though their expectations were a rope tightening around her neck, leaving her terrified of making even the smallest mistake for fear of condemnation or punishment.
As I grew older and could take care of myself financially,
she explained,
I realized I didn't have to live like that anymore. I decided to stop playing by their rules, and when the weight of it all became too much, I left. I just couldn't be in that bondage any longer.
Michael listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he said gently,
I'm sorry you had to go through all of that. It sounds like your faith have been driven by fear, not love. I get it. I've been there. But faith, at its core, is about freedom. It's about love, not control. Faith in God isn't supposed to feel like a burden. It's meant to set you free, not hold you down. Jesus said, "For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." Faith isn't supposed to weigh you down.
His words left Samuella with something to ponder, a flicker of hope that maybe faith could be different from the rigid version she'd known. Still, she hesitated when Michael invited her again to church. Her first instinct was to refuse, but with a hesitant smile, she finally agreed, only to find herself feeling unexpectedly moved by the church experience. Michael's gentle guidance showed her a different side of faith, one rooted in love rather than obligation. They began attending a few church services together, where Michael showed her a different side of worship, one that felt more like a relationship than a strict set of rules. Through his guidance, she saw a different view of faith, one rooted in love rather than obligation. She even made light jokes about the Bible with him, a healthy humor that brought a sense of ease she hadn't known before. Over time, Samuella and Michael became unlikely companions. Their worlds couldn't have been more different, Samuella with her coding, her structured logic, and Michael with his abstract thinking and creative flair. Yet, they shared a deep connection in their conversations. He had a way of seeing the world that fascinated her, and he seemed genuinely interested in the way her mind worked. Michael also started to help her grapple with something deeper, her search for purpose. He talked about life as an artist, about how his sculptures were his way of trying to understand the world and his place in it. It was through these talks that Samuella began to see reasons why she needed to be close to God again. Her love for God moved her to make a heartfelt prayer to God at nights. But through it all, something felt off. Despite their closeness, she never felt the kind of romantic connection she thought would come. Michael, with his intelligent mind and open heart, became a confidant, a guide even. Yet, her feelings remained platonic. She couldn't shake the guilt of it. Was she leading him on by spending so much time with him? For his part, Michael was perceptive. He never pressed, never defined what they were. Though Samuella often caught him watching her in moments of quiet, she couldn't tell if he was just observing, or if he was trying to figure her out in the same way he shaped his sculptures. Months passed, and Michael prepared for a major exhibition, a high-profile event that would attract tourists and top art critics. He invited Samuella to the opening, casually handing her an invitation during one of their conversations.
I think you'll find this one interesting,
he said with a mysterious smile. Curious, Samuella decided to attend. The exhibition was packed with people, and as the evening went on, she found herself captivated by the sculptures on display. But when she reached the centerpiece of the exhibition, her heart sank. The sculpture was unmistakably about her. It wasn't an exact likeness, but the story it told of a woman searching for herself, fleeing from expectations and struggling with identity, was hers. The narrative that accompanied the sculpture felt like a betrayal. Michael had used the most intimate parts of her life, the parts she had shared with him in confidence, to create art for public consumption. Samuella felt a wave of anger and humiliation wash over her. She turned and walked out of the exhibition, her heart racing. Tears pricked at her eyes as she made her way home. Later that night, Michael showed up at her door, concern etched on his face.
Samuella, what's going on? Why did you leave?
How could you? You took my story, my life, and put it on display without asking me. Was this why you never defined our friendship? Was I just some project for you to exploit?
She demanded, her voice trembling.
Samuella, it wasn't like that.
Michael began, but she cut him off.
You used me. You've made money off of my pain, and I didn't even know. Is this how you see me? Just another muse for your work? And what's worse, I never even liked you like that.
Her voice rose, tears streaming down her face. Michael froze, his expression hardening. He asked quietly, his voice tinged with hurt.
You never liked me. Is that what this is about?
She shouted, her frustration boiling over.
Yes, and look at you. You don't always take care of yourself. Only on few occasions like today. You think your art can hide how awful you look.
Her words struck a nerve, and she immediately regretted saying them. Michael's face darkened. He had grown up being body-shamed as a child, bullied for his appearance, and it had left deep scars. He had always chosen to focus on his art rather than the way he looked, but Samuella's words cut through his defenses. Michael's voice was cold now, his hurt evident.
Is that what you really think of me? Fine, I guess I should go.
And with that, he turned and left. 4 days, neither of them spoke. Samuella was racked with guilt. She hadn't meant to hurt him like that, but the betrayal she had felt at the exhibition had overwhelmed her. She also realized that, deep down, her anger wasn't just about the sculpture, it was about the unresolved tension between them, the confusion about where they stood. Finally, after days of reflection, she reached out to Michael. They met at a small cafe on the quiet edge of town, and when Michael arrived, he looked surprisingly put together, with a quiet confidence that startled her. Michael noticed her expression, the slight widening of her eyes, and the way her lips parted as if to say something but hesitated. He knew in his heart that he had always tried his best to look presentable for her, ever since the first day they met, but after seeing her reaction the last time, he couldn't help but feel like his efforts had never quite measured up. With a small, sheepish smile, he broke the silence.
I wanted to look extra good for you today, Samuella.
He admitted, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability.
I've always been interested in you, but I didn't want to ruin our friendship.
Samuella's heart softened, a warmth she hadn't expected spreading through her.
Thank you for telling me, she replied gently, and I'm sorry for what I said. I was hurt and lashed out, but that doesn't excuse it.
Michael nodded.
I'm sorry too. The sculpture was supposed to reflect resilience, not your pain. I should have talked to you first.
Their hands found each other across the table, a quiet understanding passing between them. Over time, Michael helped her work through her complex feelings about faith. One evening, he said,
Worshipping God doesn't have to feel like a trap. There's a verse I hold dear. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
Hearing this, Samuella felt a weight lift from her heart again, as if finally released from the strictness she'd grown up with. Their connection deepened into love, filled with laughter, shared stories, and quiet moments. Months later, walking hand in hand through the same park where they'd first met, Samuella knew she'd found a partner who loved her, someone who understood her soul. As they gazed at the evening sky, she felt truly free, not from rules, but from fear. Their smiles said it all, knowing that this was only the beginning of the life they'd build together, filled with love, laughter, and a freedom both had long sought in different ways.